Hello and welcome. In this video we will be going over the instructions on how to build your Scramble Champions Kit vehicle. Please note that in a future video we will be going over how to build your launcher, how to test your vehicle and make it go to a specific distance, how to make sure your vehicle meets all Division C requirements for the 2022 to 2023 season, how to make and efficiently utilize your practice and design logs, and much more. But for this video, we will only be focusing on the vehicle instructions itself. With all of that said, let's get right into the build instructions. So when you open up your kit, the first thing that you're going to notice is the bundle of all your tubes and rods. You'll also notice your 3D parts bag, your metal parts bag, and your non-metal parts bag. Now what you want to make sure you look at is the USB drive in the metal parts bag. This USB drive contains all of the digital files that pertain to your kit. So this includes the design logs, 3D models, and much more. So you want to make sure you're taking a good look at the contents on your USB drive. But with all that said, let's get right into it. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to assemble the chassis, and to do so you want to find the back piece and the front pivot piece from your 3D parts bag. Now what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to remove the support material from those pieces, and to do so you're going to need a sharp edge, or not even a sharp edge, a thin edge, and you want to put that in between the support piece and the actual part itself, and then you just want to pry those support pieces off. They come off really easily and should not be that much of an issue for you. And there will also be some other support pieces that are where the ball bearing and carbon fiber holes are, and yeah, I just pointed those out here. So you just want to take some pliers or something similar, and you just want to use a little bit of force, and then you should be able to push those out, and they should come out relatively easily. Alright, so after you take out all of those support materials from your parts, you're going to want to take your metal parts bag and you want to open that. Here I'm using a blade, but you can also use scissors or some other suitable material or tool. And you're going to want to take out 4 number 4-40 bolts. Now you'll also need some hex nuts for those bolts, and you're going to want to find 4 number 4-40 hex nuts. So after you get all your bolts, you're going to want to make sure you have the correct orientation of the front pivot piece, and to do so you're just going to want to make sure that the completely flat portion of the front pivot piece is facing upwards. So the next thing you're going to want to do is take your carbon fiber square tubes, and you're going to want to put those, each one in one of the gaps, in sort of the plus shaped gap on the back piece, and you're going to want to make sure that the holes are aligned with the hole on the back piece. And you're going to want to, after sandwiching 2 in the back piece, you're going to want to take the bolt and push that through there, and use a hex nut to secure both carbon fiber tubes to the back piece. And you're going to want to repeat this exact process with the other side of the back piece. So again, you're just going to take 2 of those square tubes, you're going to align them with the gaps on the back piece, and you're going to want to make sure that the holes align with the hole on the back piece, and then take one more 1-inch long bolt and push those through both the tubes and the back piece, and then secure that 1-inch long screw with a number 4 hex nut. And you could secure each hex nut to the bolt using a screwdriver and pliers, and after you do so you're going to want to attach this front pivot piece to the chassis and the carbon fiber square tubes. And when you're doing so, you're going to want to make sure you have the correct orientation, so that's where you have the flat portion of the pivot piece facing upwards, and then that little gap at the front of the pivot piece where facing downwards. So after you do that and you put the carbon fiber square tubes in their appropriate slots, you're going to want to take 2 more 1-inch long number 4 bolts and push those through the holes on the carbon fiber square tube, and then secure those again with a hex nut. It's pretty much the exact same process we used for that back piece. So after assembling the chassis, you're going to want to assemble the launch pin, and to do so you're going to want to take the 1.5-inch long number 4 bolt, and then you're going to push that bolt through the bottom of the back piece upwards, and then use a number 4 hex nut to secure it. And this launch pin is essentially going to allow your vehicle to connect to the string that the weight when it falls down pulls. And through this launch pin, your vehicle will be able to be propelled by the launcher. So just again, you're pushing it through the bottom, and you're going to want to make sure that it points out upwards so that it can connect to the string. Now we're going to attach the ball bearings to the ball bearing slots on the back piece, and when you're doing so, you're going to want to make sure that you lightly sand the ball bearing slots if you're finding difficulty attaching them. And when you're attaching the ball bearings to the ball bearing slot, you don't necessarily need to use super glue. Like I said, again, you don't need to use super glue. There should be a pretty tight fit, but if you choose to use super glue, you just want to put a very small drop. And by putting just a drop, you're going to prevent that glue from accidentally seeping into the actual metal balls of the ball bearing. And if it seeps in there, then it may cause your ball bearings to lock up, and it won't necessarily function properly. So when you're attaching your ball bearing to the ball bearing slot, you just want to take some pliers, and you just want to gently press the ball bearings. And it may take a little bit of force, but if you're noticing that you have to use an excessive amount of force to push the ball bearing into the ball bearing slot, then you probably should sand that area. If you don't, then you risk the possibility that the ball bearing is going to put a little crack into that back piece. And if it happens, it's not a big deal. It's certainly definitely salvageable. You just have to put a little bit of glue on that crack and let it dry for a little bit before you continue. But to make sure you avoid all of those issues, you just want to make sure you sand that area lightly. So what we're going to do now is we're going to assemble the back axle, and the first thing you're going to want to get is the heat shrink. And you're also going to need a Sharpie, you're going to need the number 6 threaded rod, you're going to need the carbon fiber round tube, you're going to also need the number 6 nuts and bolts, the wing nut, the spring, the washers. And the first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to take your Sharpie and take your threaded rod and place that on top of the back axle and put it in a position that you are going to want that axle to be, and then mark where the ball bearing is on the threaded rod. And it doesn't have to be completely centered on the back axle, just where you want it to be relatively. You can always change that position later, but you just want to mark that with a Sharpie on the threaded rod. And after you do that, what we're going to do is we're going to determine the orientation of the threaded rod. And to do so, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to take your wing nut, the number 6 wing nut, and you're going to want to put that onto the threaded rod just a little bit. And after you do so, you're going to want to hold that threaded rod and rotate the axle clockwise. And if the flat portion of the wing nut moves towards the center of the axle, then you have the correct orientation. If it moves away from the center of the axle, then what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to flip that axle, and you're going to want to check again. If you hold that wing nut and rotate the axle clockwise, then the flat portion of the wing nut should move towards the center. Now in my case, the first orientation was correct, so I'm just going to make sure I remember that orientation of the threaded rod. And now we're going to put assemble the brake loosely. So to do so, we're going to put first 2 hex nuts, followed by a washer of the spring, a washer, the wing nut, and then 2 more hex nuts. So again, you're just going to put that in that orientation as I've shown right here. And again, I'm putting 2 hex nuts first. So 2 number 6 hex nuts are going to be put on the axle in the orientation I showed. And then again, so I'm putting 2 number 6 hex nuts onto the threaded rod. And after I put these number 6 hex nuts on the threaded rod, I'm not tightening them, I'm just putting it very loosely. You can adjust this later, but I'm threading that on a decent amount. And then I'm going to put a washer, a spring, and then I'm going to put another washer followed by that spring. I'm going to move everything a little bit closer to the center. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to thread that number 6 wing nut so that the flat portion of the wing nut is closest towards the spring. So again, I'm putting that wing nut on, and after I put this wing nut on, I'm going to put 2 more number 6 hex nuts onto the axle. And then I'm going to move everything closer to the center, and then we're going to slide this axle through the 2 ball bearings, and we're going to put some heat shrink over the places I marked. We're going to shrink the heat shrink, and then we're going to put that on the axle. So again, I put 2 more number 6 hex nuts on. I'm moving everything towards the center by just grasping my hand over everything, and I'm just rotating the axle clockwise. So after I get that a decent amount closer towards the center, I'm going to make sure I identify the longer portion of the threaded rod, and I'm going to push that longer portion of the threaded rod through 1 ball bearing, and I'm pushing that as far as I can. And after I push that through, I'm just going to push the other end of the threaded rod through the other ball bearing. Now what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to take some heat shrink, and you're going to want to cut off 2 small pieces of that heat shrink, and you're going to want to put each piece of that heat shrink on top of the Sharpie mark you made on that threaded rod. So here I'm doing that on one end. So with the supervision of an adult and making sure you're wearing safety goggles and taking all necessary safety precautions, you're going to want to take a lighter or a heat gun. And what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to heat up that heat shrink so it begins to cling onto that number 6 threaded rod. So here I'm using a grill lighter, which is probably the safest if you're planning on using a lighter. And what I'm just going to do is I'm going to put my flame on top of that heat shrink, and I'm just going to shrink that heat shrink so that it is now bounded to that threaded rod. And now I'm going to push my number 6 threaded rod so that I can put the other heat shrink piece on the other Sharpie mark I put on the threaded rod. So here I'm just pushing that through, and if you notice some difficulty pushing it through, you just want to heat it up a little bit more because it's probably not all the way down. So again, I'm just making sure I'm using safety precautions, having adult over supervision. I'm just heating up that heat shrink so it is now bound to the threaded rod. And now you should be able to just push that heat shrink piece inside the ball bearing. It may be a little bit difficult, but you probably do not need to use super glue to attach this heat shrink to the ball bearing, at least for the threaded rod. But if you find it to be loose, then you can try a small bead of super glue. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take our carbon fiber round tubes and push those through the round tube slots that are just behind the ball bearing slots. And when you do that, you're just going to want to put a small drop of super glue on each end of the round tube as you push it in. And when you're pushing it in, you're going to want to make sure that just one wing of the wing nut is sandwiched in between both of the carbon fiber round tube. What this is going to do is it's going to make sure that your wing nut is engaged and will move towards the spring and stop your car as your vehicle travels forward. So again, just using some super glue, pushing those through the round tube slots on the back axle piece, and then making sure that one wing of the wing nut is sandwiched in between both carbon fiber pieces. Now what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to move the two hex nuts on both sides of the wing nuts further away from each other, so you have a decent amount of threaded rod to work with for your wing nut to travel on and stop your vehicle throughout the run. So after you find a designated distance, it doesn't have to be a specific one, just take two pliers and you're going to want to make sure that those two hex nuts are tightened towards each other so that they don't move when the wing nut contacts those two hex nuts. Those are going to act as your brake, and again, yeah, you're just going to want to push that spring toward the closest two hex nuts, and you should be able to move your wing nut to either of the two hex nuts, and it should be able to stop and not move any further. So now what we're going to do is we're going to attach the wheels to the back axle, but first we're going to put the treads onto the wheels. So we're going to take the two smaller wheels, which are 60 millimeters in diameter, and you're just going to put those threads on the outer edge of the wheel, and those are going to allow your wheels to have better traction. So it'll take a little bit of force to put those on, and after you put those onto the wheels, you're going to want to take some more of the number 6 hex nuts, and you're going to want to put one wing nut on each end of the number 6 threaded rod. And after you put one hex nut on, you're going to put the wheel on, followed by another hex nut, and you're going to tighten the two hex nuts onto the wheel, and you're going to want to use some pliers or similar to make sure it's securely attached. So again, after I'm attaching this one, what I'm going to do is take another number 6 hex nut. I'm going to put that on the other end of the number 6 threaded rod. And after I do that, I'm going to take the wheel and I'm going to slide that wheel onto the end of the threaded rod, and I'm going to put another number 6 hex nut onto the end of the threaded rod, and then I'm going to secure it. So again, I'm putting a number 6 hex nut, and then I'm going to put the wheel onto the end of the threaded rod, and then I'm going to put another number 6 hex nut onto the axle, and then I'm going to tighten the two number 6 hex nuts together so that the 60 millimeter diameter wheel is securely attached to the threaded rod. So now what we're going to do is we're going to assemble the front axle of the vehicle. So again, like the back axle, you may notice that you have some support material that you need to remove, and you can do so by taking some pliers and then gently prying those pieces out. Alright, so now what we're going to do is just like with the back axle, we're going to take two bearings and we're going to push those into the ball bearing slots using some pliers and super glue if necessary. Again, you want to make sure that you're sanding the ball bearing slots if you're finding it difficult to push those bearings into their respective slots. And this again is going to prevent your pieces from accidentally cracking or breaking, but if they do, again, it really is not the end of the world. All you have to do is take some super glue, glue those pieces back into their intended spots, and then let it dry before continuing. So after doing all of that, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to take the 300 millimeter long carbon fiber round tube, and you're going to want to cut off some small pieces of the heat shrink. And after you do that, what we're going to do is we're going to, just like with the threaded rod, we're going to place that 300 millimeter long carbon fiber round tube over the front axle piece, and we're going to mark that with and we're going to place the heat shrink pieces where we want it to be. We're not marking it this time because we don't have to put anything on the axle, and it's difficult to mark that with a threaded rod. So again, with the safety, taking all safety precautions necessary, using the supervision of an adult, we're going to use a heat gun or a lighter to heat up the heat shrink pieces onto the threaded rod. And again, I'm double checking to make sure I have the heat shrink pieces in the right place, and then I'm using a grill lighter, or you can also use a heat shrink, a heat gun to heat up the heat shrink and attach it to the carbon fiber round tube. And after doing so, all you have to do is slide that tube into the ball bearings. And if you notice that the tube is loose in the front axle, you can take some super glue and you can put a small bead. You don't want it to be too big, otherwise the glue may seep into the ball bearings and it may stiffen up the ball bearing and it won't work as effectively as you would like. So after you put some glue on there, you let it sit for a little bit. You can use accelerator if you want to. Alright, so after you do that, what you're going to want to do is find the two large wheels. They are 70 millimeters in diameter. And you're also going to want to find two of the wheel treads. And you're going to want to try to put those treads onto the wheel. It is much more difficult to do this and requires a decent amount of strength and patience to do so. But you just have to put those treads on the outer edge of the wheel. And it doesn't have to be perfect because you can align it later, but you just want to make sure you have those treads on, and then you can align it so that they fit onto the wheel. So after you manage to attach the wheel, what you're going to do is take some super glue, and you're just going to want to slide those wheels onto the 300 millimeter long carbon fiber round tube. So again, just put some super glue on there, slide the wheels on, and you can let it dry for a little bit. So after we attach these wheels, what we're going to do is we're going to assemble the backstop. And to do so, what we're going to do is we're going to take the dowel rod and we're going to take the backstop piece. And what we're going to do is we're going to slide that backstop piece onto the dowel so that the two bottom holes are towards the bottom. And we're going to make sure we're going to measure the height of the two holes on the backstop when we put it onto the front axle piece, and we're going to make sure that it's at the height we want it to be. And after we check that, we're going to pull that dowel off of the front axle piece. We're going to take the two small dowels from the non-metal parts bag, and we're just going to use some force and push these dowels into the backstop piece. It may take a little bit of force, but it shouldn't take too much. So after you put both of those two dowels in place, you can glue those dowels with some super glue. And if you already marked or already measured the height of the backstop and you know it's in the spot you want it to be, you can go ahead and glue the dowel to the 20 centimeter long dowel as well. And after you do that, just simply attach your backstop to the front axle piece, and then you can use some super glue to secure that backstop to the front axle piece. Alright, so now what we're going to do is we're going to attach the front axle to the front pivot piece. And when we're doing so, you're going to want to take a 1-inch long bolt, push it through the front axle piece, and then push the rest of the bolt through the front pivot piece. And it doesn't matter where the axle is, like what orientation it is, we can change it later, but you just want to make sure that the front axle is connected to the front pivot piece. and you can use a screwdriver to make sure it's attached properly. And after you attach that front axle to the front pivot piece, what we're going to do is we're going to assemble the steering arm for the front axle. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take the last 20 centimeter long carbon fiber round tube and the rest of the 3D parts, and we're just going to attach the stationary adjustment arm piece and the adjustable adjustment arm piece to the threaded rod with those holes on the piece. So just putting a little bit on the carbon fiber round tube and then pushing that through the hole. And I'm just going to let this sit on my table for a little bit so we can rest and dry up, and then you might want to use some accelerator if you want to work a little faster. But now I'm just going to take the 1/2 inch long number 4 bolts, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to attach the middle of the adjustable head of the adjustment arm. I'm going to attach that to the hole on the right side of the front axle, and you're going to want to make sure that the front axle is somewhat in a middle position. So, you know, not too far to the right, not too far to the left, just in the middle. And again, I'm just attaching the bolt so that the middle part of the adjustment arm, adjustment arm head is on the front axle. So now what we're going to do is we're going to attach the adjustment arm that attaches to the chassis, and we're going to attach that to the stationary head of the adjustment arm. And to do so, I'm pushing the other 1/2 inch long number 4 bolts through the adjustment arm mount, and then I'm going to push the rest of the bolt through the stationary head of the adjustment arm. And after I do so, after we push that through the stationary head of the adjustment arm, we're going to use some super glue, and we're going to attach the square groove of the stationary adjustment arm to the bottom bottom square carbon fiber square tube. So when you're using super glue to attach that square tube to the square groove on the adjustment arm, you're going to want to make sure that the front axle is somewhat in the center of the vehicle, because if it's not, then you may find it difficult to achieve the optimal steering. It doesn't have to be perfectly in the center, but if it's so far to the right or so far to the left, then you just might not be able to get that perfect steering adjustment. So again, I'm just using super glue, attaching the adjustment arm to the chassis, and then I'm just going to let that sit for a little bit, use some accelerator if I need to, and the vehicle should be just about done. So again, like I said in the beginning of this video is just going to cover the instructions on how to build the vehicle itself. In a future video, we will be going over how to build a launcher. You'll also be going over in a future video how to make your vehicle more accurate, how to have it go to a specific distance, and we're also going to be going over how to make sure your vehicle meets all the efficiency requirements, and we'll also be going over how to make your practice and design logs and much more. If you're interested in purchasing the kit, please look at the link in the description below. And with all of that said, thank you all for watching, and I'll catch you guys next time. Stay unfazed.